In Desmond Doss, they said only firepower stops chaos. He stopped it with calm and faith. The smoke rolled in thick across the ridge that morning, carrying with it the smell of cordite and wet earth turned inside out by shells. Okinawa, April 1945, and the sheer face of Hacksaw Ridge rose like a wall between the American positions below and the plateau above, where Japanese guns had been spitting death for 3 days straight. The 77th Infantry Division had climbed that cliff twice already. Twice they'd been thrown back down, leaving wounded scattered across the top like discarded equipment. Now, at 0800 hours, the company was supposed to go up again. Private First Class Desmond Doss stood near the base of the cliff, checking the straps on his medical kit for the third time. His hands moved steadily, methodically, even as mortars thumped somewhere above, and men around him muttered prayers or curses or nothing at all. He wore no rifle, never had, never would. Some of the men still whispered about it. The medic who wouldn't carry a weapon, who'd gotten through training on conviction alone. Others had stopped noticing. They'd seen what he did when the bullets started flying. Lieutenant Ackers, face drawn tight with sleeplessness, gathered the platoon near a cluster of shattered palms. His voice was hoarse. "Listen up. Intelligence says the ridge is lighter than yesterday." Artillery pounded them all night. "We go up, we secure the plateau, we hold until relieved." Simple. Nobody believed him. Simple didn't exist on Hacksaw Ridge. Doss glanced at the cliff face. 75 feet of rain-slick rock and mud, carved by runoff and pocked with shell impacts. Cargo nets and ropes dangled from the lip above, swaying slightly in the wind. At the top, smoke drifted across open ground. Nothing moved, but that didn't mean nothing was there. Corporal Ben Takashi, a stocky rifleman from Hawaii, caught Doss's eye and shook his head slowly. "You ready for this, Doc?" "As ready as yesterday," Doss said quietly. "Yesterday was hell. Today might be worse." Takashi almost smiled. Almost. By 0830, the company began climbing. Men grabbed the ropes and nets, boots scraping rock, rifles slung awkward across their backs. Doss went up with the second wave, his kit heavier than most packs, filled with bandages, sulfanilamide powder, morphine syrettes, tourniquets. He moved carefully, testing each handhold, his breath steady even as his heart hammered. Below, the ground dropped away. Above, the plateau waited. They reached the top without contact. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. The silence felt wrong. Too thick, too watchful. The ridge stretched flat and cratered before them, dotted with the stumps of trees that had been whole a week ago. Shallow foxholes and shell craters marked the mud. And somewhere out there, invisible in the haze, the Japanese waited. Lieutenant Ackers waved the men forward. They spread out in a skirmish line, moving slowly, rifles up. Doss stayed close to the center, eyes scanning for casualties from the last assault. He spotted one almost immediately. A helmet half buried in mud, a boot sticking out from behind a splintered log. Then the first shot cracked across the ridge. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a single rifle round that snapped past Takashi's head and buried itself in the dirt. The line froze. For one long breath, nobody moved. Then the ridge exploded. Machine guns opened up from concealed positions, ripping through the smoke. Mortars began falling, shaking the ground, sending geysers of mud into the air. Men dropped flat, crawling for cover. Others fired blindly into the haze, shouting orders nobody could hear. Chaos, instant and absolute. Doss pressed himself into a shallow crater, breathing hard, listening to the storm of steel overhead. Somewhere to his left, a man screamed. Another voice shouted, "Medic!" from the smoke. Then another, and another. The calls came from every direction, desperate and raw. Lieutenant Ackers's voice cut through the noise, high and strained. "Pull back! Everyone back to the cliff! Move! Move! Move!" The line collapsed. Men scrambled toward the cliff edge, dragging wounded, firing over their shoulders. The ridge became a stampede of panicked movement, soldiers tripping over debris, abandoning gear, their faces blank with shock. Doss saw Takashi stumble past, eyes wide, rifle clutched tight. Others followed, sliding down the ropes, half falling down the nets. But the cries for help didn't stop. They came from the craters, from behind the logs, from the open ground where men lay exposed. Doss looked toward the cliff edge, then back toward the smoke. His pulse hammered in his ears. His hands shook. And then, without fully deciding, he turned away from the retreat and started crawling forward into the fire. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation. And stay with us for the next chapters. The first man Doss reached was a private named Ellis, maybe 19, with shrapnel embedded in his shoulder and leg. He lay in a crater 20 yards from the cliff edge, gasping, his face pale beneath the dirt. Machine gun fire stitched the ground nearby, but Doss didn't flinch. He slid into the crater beside Ellis, hands already moving, tourniquet above the leg wound, pressure on the shoulder, morphine syrette into the thigh. "Easy," Doss said, his voice low and steady. "You're going to be fine." Ellis stared at him, eyes glassy with shock. "They left. Everyone left." "I'm here," Doss said, "and we're going to get you down." He worked quickly, wrapping the wounds with field dressings, checking for signs of arterial bleeding. Ellis's breathing steadied slightly. Doss glanced toward the cliff edge. Too far to drag him alone, especially under fire. He'd have to wait for a lull or for help. But help wasn't coming. The ridge was empty now, except for the wounded and the dead. And Doss. He moved to the next man, then the next. Each time, he crawled through the smoke and mud, following the cries, ignoring the bullets that cracked overhead. His kit grew lighter as he used up bandages and morphine. His hands, steady at first, began to tremble slightly. Not from fear exactly, but from the sheer weight of what he was doing. Every man he reached looked at him the same way. Disbelief, then desperate hope. By mid-morning he'd stabilized 6 casualties, but none of them could move on their own, and he couldn't carry them all. The ridge remained under steady fire, mortars falling at irregular intervals, shaking the earth. Doss crouched behind a shattered tree stump, breathing hard, trying to think. His uniform was soaked with rain and sweat. His hands were raw from crawling over rock and coral. Then he heard it, a voice, faint but clear, coming from the far side of the ridge. "Medic, please." Doss closed his eyes, breathed deep, whispered a short prayer. "Lord, just one more. Help me get one more." He started crawling again. At the base of the cliff, Lieutenant Ackers stood near the aid station, staring up at the ridge through binoculars. Rain had started falling again, turning the slope into a muddy cascade. Medics worked on the wounded who'd made it down. Triage, bandaging, morphine. The lieutenant lowered the binoculars slowly. "Someone's still up there." Corporal Takashi, crouched nearby with his rifle across his knees, didn't look up. "It's Doss." "What?" "The medic. He didn't come down." Ackers turned, face pale. "He's alone up there." "Yes, sir." The lieutenant stared at the cliff edge, jaw working. Orders were orders. The platoon had pulled back. The ridge was a death trap. No one should be up there. But Doss was. And he was still moving, still working, still finding men everyone else had left behind. Ackers reached for the radio, then hesitated. What would he say? That he'd ordered a retreat and one unarmed medic had refused? That the man was saving lives in a place where everyone else had run? He lowered the radio, said nothing. Up on the ridge, Doss reached the voice he'd heard. A young replacement, barely out of training, with a sucking chest wound. The kid was drowning in his own blood, eyes wide and terrified. Doss worked fast, sealing the wound with a field dressing pressed flat against the chest, tilting him slightly to drain. The kid coughed, gasped, started breathing easier. "Stay with me," Doss said. "Don't you quit on me." The mortars kept falling, the machine guns kept firing, but Doss's hands stayed steady, his voice stayed calm, and somehow, impossibly, he kept moving through the chaos like a man walking through a quiet field, untouched by the storm around him. By noon, the rain had turned the ridge into a swamp. Mud sucked at boots, filled craters, turned every step into a gamble. Doss had moved 9 wounded men to the cliff edge, dragging them one by one through the muck. His shoulders screamed with fatigue, his hands were torn and bleeding, but he didn't stop. Each time he lowered a man over the cliff using improvised rope harnesses made from cargo straps and torn webbing. His muscles shook with the effort. Each time the rope came back up, he went looking for the next casualty. Word had spread at the base of the cliff. Soldiers gathered near the aid station, watching in silence as another wounded man appeared at the top, tied into a makeshift harness, being lowered hand over hand by someone they couldn't see. A stretcher team caught the casualty, cut him free, carried him to the medics. Then the rope went back up, and a few minutes later, another man came down. A sergeant from another company approached Lieutenant Ackers, voice low. "How many has he brought down?" 9, maybe 10. Jesus Christ. "He's still up there." The sergeant shook his head slowly, staring at the cliff. "How's he still alive?" Nobody answered. There was no answer. The ridge should have killed him 10 times over. Machine guns swept the open ground. Mortars fell at random. Snipers fired from hidden positions. Yet Doss kept moving, kept working, kept lowering men down that cliff as if the war itself had agreed to let him finish. Up on the ridge, Doss found another casualty. A lieutenant from a different platoon, unconscious, bleeding from a head wound. He checked for a pulse, found one, weak but steady, wrapped the head with bandages, dragged him toward the cliff edge, pausing every few feet to rest, to breathe, to whisper another prayer. "Just one more, Lord, one more." His arms felt like lead. His legs trembled. Dehydration made his vision swim, but he kept going. Because the alternative, leaving men to die alone in the mud, was something he couldn't live with. Corporal Takashi appeared at the cliff edge, rifle slung, face determined. "Doc?" Doss looked up, startled. "Ben? What are you doing up here?" "Helping," Takashi said, sliding down into the crater beside him. "You can't do this alone. You're supposed to be down there." "Yeah, well," Takashi grabbed the lieutenant's other arm. "So are you." Together, they dragged the unconscious officer to the cliff edge. Doss tied the harness, checked the knots, then started lowering. Takashi held the rope steady, adding his weight to keep it from slipping. When the lieutenant reached the bottom, they hauled the rope back up. "How many more?" Takashi asked. Doss looked across the ridge, counting the cries he could still hear. "Too many." They kept working. By mid-afternoon, the chaos on the ridge had taken on a strange rhythm. Mortars fell. Machine guns fired. And between the bursts of violence, Doss and Takashi moved like ghosts through the smoke, finding wounded, stabilizing them, dragging them to the cliff edge, lowering them one by one. The work became mechanical, almost meditative. Bandage, drag, tie, lower, repeat. Neither man spoke much. There was nothing to say. At the aid station below, a young medic named Carter watched the casualties arrive, one after another, each one with the same story. The medic. "He's still up there. The one without a rifle." "Yeah. He keeps coming. Keeps finding us." Carter glanced at the older doctor beside him, a captain named Reeves who'd seen 2 years of Pacific combat. Reeves was working on a sucking chest wound, hands steady, face expressionless, but his jaw was tight. "How many has he saved?" Carter asked. Reeves didn't look up. "I stopped counting at 20. Would you follow the orders exactly? Or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The sun started dropping toward the horizon, and with it came a new kind of fear. Night fighting on Hacksaw Ridge meant chaos compounded, no visibility, enemy infiltrators, friendly fire incidents. Lieutenant Ackers radioed up from the base, voice crackling with static. "Doss, you need to come down. Now. That's an order." Doss pressed the radio handset to his ear, breathing hard. "There are still men up here, sir." "I know. But if you stay up there after dark, you're dead. We all know it." Doss looked across the ridge. He could see at least 3 more casualties from where he crouched, men who'd been lying there for hours, calling out, waiting, hoping. "I can get them, sir." "Doss, just a few more, please." The radio went silent for a long moment. Then Akers' voice came back quieter. "You have until full dark, not 1 minute more." "Yes, sir." Doss handed the radio to Takashi and started moving again. His body screamed in protest, every muscle strained, every joint aching, his hands so raw they left blood on everything he touched. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. Not while men were still calling his name. The next casualty was a sergeant named Howell, pinned under a collapsed dugout, legs crushed. It took Doss and Takashi 20 minutes to dig him out, working with their bare hands, pulling away mud and splintered wood. Howell was conscious, teeth gritted against the pain. "Leave me," he gasped. "You'll never get me down." "Not a chance," Doss said. They dragged him to the cliff edge. The rope was fraying now, fibers coming loose, stained dark with mud and blood. Doss checked the knots carefully, then started lowering Howell. Halfway down, the rope slipped. Doss caught it, his palms tearing open, but he held on. Takashi grabbed the rope too, adding his weight. Together they lowered Howell the rest of the way. When the rope came back up, Doss's hands were shaking so badly he could barely tie the next knot. "Doc," Takashi said quietly, "you're done. We have to go. 2 more. You can barely stand." 2 more! They found a private named Liu, semi-conscious, with shrapnel in his back. Doss bandaged the wounds as best he could. Then they dragged him to the cliff, lowered him down. 1 more. The last man was the hardest. He lay at the far edge of the plateau, near a ruined bunker, barely visible in the fading light. Japanese positions were close. Doss could hear voices, see movement in the smoke. But the man was alive, calling weakly for help. Doss looked at Takashi. "Stay here. Keep the rope ready." "Doc, that's suicide." "Maybe, but I'm going." He crawled forward alone, moving slowly, staying low. Every few feet he paused, listening, praying. The voices grew louder. Then he saw the casualty. A rifleman named Garcia, bleeding from multiple wounds, too weak to move. Doss reached him, pressed a hand over his mouth to keep him quiet, then started bandaging. A Japanese soldier appeared through the smoke, rifle raised. Doss froze. The soldier froze. For 1 impossible second, they stared at each other across 10 feet of mud and darkness. Doss had no weapon, no way to fight, no way to run with Garcia beside him. The soldier's rifle began to rise. Then a mortar fell 20 yards away, the explosion shaking the ground, sending smoke and debris between them. When the air cleared, the soldier was gone, retreating or repositioned or simply choosing not to fire. Doss didn't know, didn't care. He grabbed Garcia and started dragging him back toward the cliff. By the time they reached Takashi, full darkness had fallen. Doss's vision swam with exhaustion. He could barely feel his hands. But he tied Garcia into the harness, checked the knots 1 last time, and lowered him down. When the rope came back up empty, Doss stared at it for a long moment. Then he collapsed against the mud, chest heaving, unable to move. "We're done," Takashi said quietly. "Let's go home." Doss nodded, couldn't speak. Together they climbed down the cliff, moving slowly in the darkness, their hands numb on the ropes. When Doss's feet touched solid ground at the base, his legs gave out. Medics caught him, eased him down, wrapped blankets around his shoulders. Lieutenant Akers stood nearby, face pale in the dim lantern light. "How many, Doss?" Doss shook his head. Couldn't remember. Couldn't think. A medic counting casualties looked up from his clipboard. 75, sir." He brought down 75 men. 3 days later, in a rear area tent that served as the battalion command post, Lieutenant Akers sat across a table from Captain Reeves and a major from division headquarters. Rain drummed on the canvas overhead. On the table between them lay a preliminary after-action report and a recommendation for the Medal of Honor. The major tapped the report with 1 finger. 75 men in 1 day under continuous fire, with no weapon. "Yes, sir," Akers said. That's The major paused. That's extraordinary. Yes, sir. The major looked at Reeves. You treated the casualties. Can you verify the number? Reeves nodded slowly. 75 wounded came down that cliff over the course of 8 hours, all stabilized, all alive when they reached my aid station, and every single one of them said the same thing. An unarmed medic kept coming back for them. The major leaned back, shaking his head. This will make the papers. This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear. Ackers hesitated. Sir, there's something you should know. What? Private Doss doesn't want recognition. He's asked me twice not to file the citation. The major frowned. Why? He says he was just doing his job, that any medic would have done the same. But they didn't. No, sir, they didn't. In a different tent, 100 yards away, Desmond Doss sat on a cot, hands wrapped in clean bandages, staring at nothing. Corporal Takashi sat beside him, cleaning his rifle in silence. Outside, the rain fell steady and cold. You okay, Doc? Doss didn't answer right away. When he spoke, his voice was soft, distant. I was terrified, Ben. The whole time. Takashi paused, glanced at him. Didn't look like it. I was. Every second, every step. I kept thinking I was about to die. But you kept going. Because they needed me. Doss's hands trembled slightly. Because I heard them calling and I couldn't just leave them. Takashi set down his rifle. Turned to face Doss fully. You know what everyone's saying, right? That you're a hero. That you did something impossible. Doss shook his head. It wasn't heroic. It was just necessary. I kept asking God for one more. Just one more man. And he kept giving me strength for one more. That's all it was. One man at a time. That's exactly what makes it heroic. Doss looked at him, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. But it doesn't feel heroic, Ben. It feels like I barely survived, like I should have done more, like I should have been faster or smarter or braver. You saved 75 men. I left some behind. I know I did. I heard voices I couldn't reach, men who died while I was helping someone else. Takashi was quiet for a long moment. Doc, nobody could have saved everyone. The ridge was hell. You did what no one else could do. Maybe. Doss's voice dropped to a whisper. But I'll remember the ones I couldn't reach. I'll hear their voices for the rest of my life. The central secret that would never appear in the citation or the newspaper stories was this. Desmond Doss spent that entire day convinced he was failing. Every man he stabilized felt like a temporary victory overshadowed by all the cries he couldn't answer. Every trip to the cliff edge felt like borrowed time before a bullet found him. Every prayer for just one more was laced with doubt and terror. The legend would say he moved through the chaos with unshakable faith and courage. The truth was simpler and harder. He moved through the chaos because he was too stubborn and too faithful to stop, even when every instinct screamed at him to run. The calm everyone saw wasn't fearlessness. It was discipline. It was conviction. It was a man so committed to his beliefs that he kept his hands steady even when his heart was breaking with fear. The award would come later. The speeches, the recognition, the stories passed down through decades. But none of it would capture the weight of that day, the trembling in his hands, the whispered prayers, the guilt he carried for the men he couldn't save, the nightmares that would wake him for years, smelling wet rope and hearing distant voices calling for help. The Medal of Honor ceremony took place months later, far from Okinawa, in a setting clean and formal and utterly disconnected from the mud and blood of Hacksaw Ridge. Desmond Doss stood at attention as the citation was read, his uniform pressed, his hands, now healed, clasped behind his back. The words described his actions with precision. 75 casualties evacuated under fire, extraordinary heroism, selfless devotion to duty. But standing there, Doss barely heard them. His mind was back on the ridge. He could smell the smoke, feel the rope cutting into his palms, hear the cries for help. The award felt surreal, a clean official version of something that had been anything but clean. After the ceremony, reporters asked him how it felt to be a hero. "I'm not a hero," he said quietly. I just did what any good medic would do. But you saved 75 men. I prayed for one at a time, that's all. Just one more. They didn't understand. How could they? The story they wanted was simple. Humble country boy refuses to carry a weapon, goes to war anyway, performs a miracle. The story he lived was more complicated. Fear, exhaustion, faith stretched to breaking, and the burden of knowing that no matter how many you save, some voices will always go unanswered. Years later, long after the war, Desmond Doss would sit on his porch in Georgia, an old man now, his hands still marked by scars from the rope. Visitors would come sometimes wanting to hear about Hacksaw Ridge. He'd tell them the outline, the ridge, the wounded, the cliff, the rope. But he never told them the whole truth. Never told them about the Japanese soldier who chose not to shoot. Never told them about the voices he couldn't reach. Never told them how, even decades later, the smell of wet rope could bring it all back. The chaos, the terror, the desperate prayers. One afternoon, a young reporter asked him what he wanted people to remember about that day. Doss was quiet for a long time, staring out at the trees, listening to the wind. I want them to remember the 75 men who went home to their families. Not me, them. But you're the one who saved them. No. Doss shook his head slowly. God saved them. I was just the hands he used. And I was scared the whole time. The reporter frowned, confused. But everyone says you were calm, that you moved through the chaos like nothing could touch you. Doss smiled faintly, sadly. That's the part they don't tell you. You can be terrified and still keep working. You can doubt yourself and still do what needs to be done. The calm they saw wasn't confidence, it was stubbornness and faith, and knowing that if I stopped, men would die. He paused, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. They said only firepower stops chaos, but firepower just makes more chaos. What stopped it that day wasn't guns or bombs. It was choosing to stay calm when everything was falling apart. It was trusting that if I just kept moving, kept praying, kept trying for one more man, that would be enough. The reporter scribbled notes, but Doss could tell he still didn't understand. Nobody did, really. The legend was too bright, too clean. It didn't leave room for the trembling hands, the whispered doubts, the nights when he woke up hearing voices he couldn't save. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the legend served a purpose, showing people that ordinary men could do extraordinary things. That faith and conviction mattered, that you didn't need a weapon to be brave. The truth, though, the truth was heavier. The truth was that Desmond Doss carried Hacksaw Ridge with him every day for the rest of his life. In the scars on his hands, in the prayers he still whispered, in the way rain on a roof could make him pause, remembering, in the knowledge that he'd been given a gift that day, not the gift of safety, but the gift of purpose, the chance to keep his promise, to save lives without taking them, to prove that calm and faith could stand against chaos. And in the quiet moments, alone with his memories, he would close his eyes and hear it again, the voices calling from the smoke, the rope burning through his hands, the whispered prayer repeated 75 times. Just one more, Lord, just one more. But if this story reminded you that behind every medal there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.